The dust hadn't settled on the road when the boy laid eyes on the rancher who would change everything. Nobody knew his real name. Nobody asked. Out here, a man was whoever he said he was, until someone decided he was worth more dead. This is not a story about justice. It's a story about what happens when a boy goes looking for it in a country where the law already belongs to someone else. Welcome to Territorial West. Frontier drama, outlaw legends, and the stories the history books buried under too much myth to find. If you're new here, this channel is Western fiction rooted in real history. We take the raw material of the frontier era and build it into something you can feel. Today we're in Lincoln County, New Mexico, 1877, and a boy with no past just rode into the wrong war. Lincoln County in 1877 was not a county. Not really. On the maps, it looked like every other stretch of New Mexico territory. A name, a border, a set of roads that connected a handful of towns nobody back east had heard of. But on the ground, Lincoln County was a kingdom. And like every kingdom, it had a king. The king's name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what he controlled. The only store, the only bank, the only government contracts for beef that fed the army posts to the north. If you wanted to sell cattle in Lincoln County, you sold through him. If you wanted credit, you borrowed from him. If you wanted to stay, you paid him. That's how it worked. Into this arrangement rode a boy. 17, maybe 18. Slight build, long hands, a smile that people remembered later. Men who wanted him dead still mentioned the smile. He'd been drifting for years by then. Arizona, Kansas, Texas. Always just ahead of something. A stepfather who didn't want him. A town that turned cold. He was used to moving on. But Lincoln County had a man in it who looked at the boy differently. An English-born rancher new to the territory, building a cattle operation on the east side of the county. He needed hands. He was also building something else, a challenge to the king's monopoly. A rival store, a rival bank, a direct pipeline to the army beef contracts that cut the king entirely out. It was an act of commercial warfare disguised as ranching. The boy didn't know that when he signed on. He just knew that for the first time in his life, someone treated him like he was worth something. That was enough. What Lincoln County was living through had a name, though no one called it that at the time. It was a range war, a market war, a political war. It was two factions fighting over who would control the money that flowed through a county the size of a small eastern state. On one side, the established power. Backed by the county sheriff, their sheriff, appointed to protect their interests, and by lawyers and political connections that ran all the way up through the territorial government to Washington. They had the law on paper. They had the guns in practice. On the other side, the challengers. English capital, idealism, a belief that open competition would break the monopoly. They had a following among the small ranchers and farmers who were tired of paying inflated prices for everything they needed to survive out here. They had a lawyer. They had ambition. And now, without entirely meaning to, they had the boy. He wasn't their soldier yet. He was a cowhand. He fed cattle, mended fence, rode the range. But he was watching. And the thing about a boy who has spent years with nothing and nobody, when he finally finds somewhere to belong, he pays attention to every threat against it. The threats were coming. The king's faction had decided that the English rancher needed to be stopped before his operation could take root. Not bought out, not driven off, stopped. Permanently. The kind of stopped that sends a message. February 1878. They sent that message. The rancher was riding back from a trip to town, unarmed, in the company of several hands. The men who came out of the brush were a posse, or what passed for one in Lincoln County, where the sheriff signed the warrants for the king's enemies, and the deputies were hired guns with a badge pinned on for the occasion. There was no standoff, no negotiation. The rancher was shot from his horse in the road and killed. His horse was shot beside him. The men who did it rode away in broad daylight because they knew no court in Lincoln County would touch them. The boy found out within hours. He had known loss before, but this was different. This wasn't a door closing on him, wasn't a town going cold, wasn't the quiet rejection of a stepfather who looked through him. This was a man who had believed in him, shot down in a road in the afternoon light. They said later that he changed that day. The smile didn't leave. People kept mentioning the smile right up until the end. But something behind it went hard. He made a vow. He didn't announce it, didn't write it down, didn't need to. The vow was simple and it was everything. The men who did this would answer for it. Not in a Lincoln County court, not to a sheriff who worked for the killers. In the only courtroom left open to him, out there on the range, where the only law was the one you carried on your hip. He joined the regulators. The regulators were officially a posse of their own. They had a legal commission, a warrant signed by a justice of the peace who sided with the dead ranchers' faction. On paper, they were law enforcement. In practice, they were a group of armed men riding into the same country war that had just killed their employer with the intent of settling accounts. The boy rode with them. He was good at this. Too good, maybe. The quick hands that people had noticed when he was just a cowhand turned out to be exactly as fast as they looked. When the regulators caught up with the men responsible for the killing, the boy was there. When the shooting started, he was there. When the smoke cleared, he was there. They ran a campaign across Lincoln County through the spring of 1878. They killed the men who had killed the rancher. Then they killed the men who protected those men. Then the King's faction killed back, and the regulators killed again. It escalated the way these things always escalate. Each side believing the other side drew first. Each side certain they were the ones pursuing justice. By summer, Lincoln County was in open warfare. The Territorial governor sent a proclamation, then the army, then the cavalry riding into the county seat, cannon included, because the fighting had moved off the range and into the streets of the town itself. The boy survived it. Most of the regulators did not. And somewhere in those months of riding and shooting and running, the boy who had come to Lincoln County looking for somewhere to belong crossed a line he could never walk back across. Here is what nobody told him when he made that vow in the dust over a dead man's body. The justice he was riding after, the accountability, the reckoning, the settling of accounts, that was just another kind of war. And in wars, the law belongs to whoever wins. The King's faction had lost the open shooting war. The regulators had matched them shot for shot and come out ahead. But the King's faction had not lost the political war. They still had the governor's ear for a while. They still had allies in the Territorial Assembly. They could still make a phone call or send a letter, it was that era, and get a man labeled an outlaw by the federal government, which is exactly what happened. The boy was offered amnesty once, an official pardon, a chance to walk away clean. He took the meeting. He testified. He gave up information. He held up his end. The pardon was rescinded before the ink dried. The political winds had shifted. The governor who offered it was gone. The new arrangement required that certain loose ends be tidied up. The boy was a loose end. He understood then, if he hadn't before, that there was no version of this where justice arrived on horseback with a warrant and everybody went home. The territory was going to keep coming for him. Because the territory was run by the men who had ordered the killing in the first place. He was never going to get clean of this. So he ran. They sent someone who knew him to find him, a man who had ridden with the regulators, who had eaten at the same fire, knew the same people, spoke the same language of that country and that time. Someone the boy might trust, or at least hesitate to shoot on sight. Now he wore a badge. He had a sheriff's commission, and he had orders. They played cat and mouse across the territory for months. The boy moved constantly, stayed with people who were loyal to him, kept moving when he felt the walls closing in. He was almost impossible to find because he was from out there. He knew the land the way you only know a place when you've ridden every corner of it with your life depending on it. Almost impossible. On a July night, in a dark room in a house he thought was safe, the man who had been his friend came through the door. One shot. The boy never saw it coming. He was 21 years old. Maybe. Nobody was entirely sure when he was born either. The newspapers had already been building him. While he was still alive and running, reporters were writing stories about the outlaw who defied the territory, who couldn't be caught, who was too fast and too clever and too wild for the law to touch. By the time he died, they had the narrative ready. They said he killed 21 men, one for each year of his life. The real number was probably 4, maybe 5, depending on how you count a gunfight where multiple people are shooting. The Lincoln County War killed far more than one young drifter's trigger finger could account for. But 21 was a better story. A dime novelist published the first biography within months. He got most of the facts wrong. He didn't care. The public didn't care. What they wanted was the myth, the boy with the easy smile who couldn't be tamed, who rode against the powerful and paid the price and died young enough to stay romantic. The truth, a scared kid who wanted somewhere to belong, who made one vow in the dust that took everything, was too messy and too sad to sell magazines. The legend has a life of its own now. It always did. If you want the full story, the extended script, the alternate ending where the pardon holds, and the deeper dive into the Lincoln County War and the real men behind the myth, it's all on Patreon. Link in the description. New episodes drop every week, and Patreon members get the scripts before the videos go live. If this story hit you the way it hit me when I first dug into it, hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it tells the algorithm this kind of storytelling is worth finding. Share it with someone who loves the Old West or a good outlaw story. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. There are 60 of these coming. One era, one legend at a time. Subscribe, like, share. I'll see you in the next one.